Let's do the wrap up of the Tour de France. Let's take a look at stages 20 and 21 and then just get our overall closure here for this year's Tour de France, which I think was a great Tour de France. I think it actually was interesting and there were very exciting moments, and there actually were GC positions for second, third, and fourth place right up to the final time trial. So the articles to me that said that this year's tour was very boring were people that are either very cynical or are those that really didn't watch this year's race. The time trial revealed and confirmed who are the strongest riders, and really take away all the little nitpicky things that happened. It really did reveal the strongest three riders. You have Roglic fading. He lost time to Froome. He dropped out of third. Seemingly, he did pay the price for all those attacks. And I don't think it was so much the downhill attack. I think it was more all that aggression, because Dumoulin had to work really hard to follow Roglic on that long downhill. Froome gave him a little help for a while, but overall it was Dumoulin trying to chase down Roglic. So I think Dumoulin, his experience, or just call it a little bit more luck, or just he was a little bit stronger or able to maintain, stave off any fatigue. He did not put in as many attacks on the uphills as Roglic did, but seemingly that allowed him to be able to save himself for this time trial, because Tom Dumoulin won the time trial, and he only won it by 1 second over Chris Froome. So Chris Froome also showed his experience versus a Roglic, where because Froome has ridden in so many long Grand Tour type races and he's been successful, he understood what he needed to do to get himself ready for this final time trial. And too bad for Roglic, but overall, it is fair because Dumoulin was very strong, Chris Froome was very strong. Even Geraint Thomas rode the first portion of the time trial where he was on pace to potentially win the time trial. But then once it became clear that he was going to win the Tour de France, why take risk? Why risk crashing? And he had a little close call in one of the turns around the midpoint. Why take too many risks? So he sat back and he was willing just to concede that time trial. Quintana had another big fade, so he did not finish this Tour de France very well. He did not really ride a very good time trial. Really, the time trial places 1 through 4, 1 through 3, 1 through 4 were very close. The gaps were all 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds. And then basically from fifth place down, then the gap started to jump up to a minute or more. So you can really see everything kind of balances out. Everything kind of balances out in that here you have Dumoulin, Froome, Thomas, Roglic finishing very strong, high up in the time trial standing. And then that's how it ended up for the overall GC for the whole race. You have first, second, third, fourth are all within about 30, 45 seconds to a minute or so, or about 2.5 minutes. And then after fourth, fifth place, then you get the big drops down, 5 minutes down, 6 minutes down, 8 minutes down, 10 minutes down. So for those guys who are really riding for GC, even that gets parsed down to you're really only the very strongest are in those first 3-4 places. It's kind of interesting to think about the roles, and because of the role, that affects what your outcome is. And what I mean is, look at Egan Bernal on Team Sky and then Latour on AG2R. Latour rode a decent time trial. He rode a great race overall. He fought in the mountains. He made sure that he kept that white jersey. But look at Bernal. Bernal is going to potentially win the Tour de France in the next 6-7 years, or for sure in the next 8 to 10 years. You have Latour, who also potentially could be a top 5 finisher, or for sure a top 10 finisher in the Tour de France. But what I mean is, Bernal was stronger in the mountains than Latour. But because Bernal had to do a lot more work in the flats and Bernal had to make sure that he didn't go, Bernal needed to make sure that he didn't use too much energy in the flats or in some of the lesser stages. He lost time, where then that ensured he was very strong for the mountains. I don't know how much work Latour was doing. It basically seemed like Bernal had to do more work than Latour generally. And because of that, Bernal had to make sure that he saved himself for the mountains more so than Latour. And because of that, Bernal was way stronger than Latour in the mountains. So if Bernal didn't have to support Froome, if Bernal didn't have to support Geraint Thomas, I think Bernal would have been a serious threat to have won the white jersey. Some of the really interesting young riders to look at for future Tour de France's: Chris Froome, clearly not done. Now it's going to be interesting between Thomas and Froome, because Thomas isn't going to want to step back and become just a domestique for Froome. So it's going to be interesting. Do they send Froome to the Giro and Thomas to the Tour de France? Do they have them do like they did in this year's tour and just let it sort itself out on the road? But that being said, Geraint Thomas and Froome are both 32, 33 years old. So in a few years, they will be out of the picture, along with somebody like a Valverde. So some of the young riders, I think, that are going to be for sure in like the top 8, 10, 12 places, but potentially Tour de France winners. Think of these names. You got Youngles, you got Bernal, you got Latour, you have that Soler from Movistar, Valgren, Cragg, Anderson, and Adam Yates. They're all around 21 to 25 years old. They're going to be riding for at least another 5 to 10 years. You have Roglic and Landa at 28. They're a threat, and Roglic clearly is a threat. He just needs to gain experience. And here's the kind of jacked up thing about Landa. So Landa, they were talking about his wattage, his watt output was equal or if not better than last year's output, and yet his success was less. So it just shows you actually can have the same wattage output or even better and yet fall down in the GC. You have Kwiatkowski, he's 28, and Ralph Micah is 28. You got Dumoulin 27, Bardet 27, and you've got Stuyven at 26. So Dumoulin for sure, if he doesn't win it, well, here's the thing though, a little bad luck, he may never win it, but he's right there on the edge. But then you've got somebody like Roglic right there too. You have these younger riders coming up behind them that actually could become more successful. And you got to think about those windows in sports, right? Like tennis, where you can be number one in the world, as let's say on the men's tour, but you're only number one because it's a down year and you don't have very much competition. Or a worst case scenario, your window is very small because you have like a Rafa Nadal coming up behind you or a Federer, but they're 19 or 20 when you're 26, 27. And then when they're hitting their prime at 20, 21, 22, your window closes really fast and they take over from you. But this is a good mix to me of young riders that have a lot of potential. Okay, going into the final stage 21 in Paris, pretty cool. But I remember a depleted sprint group, but you have Christophe finally gets a stage win. And that's Christophe's first stage win in the Tour de France in 4 years. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of teams, and Laporte was in the mix, and he fell short. So Cofidis still has not won a stage in the Tour de France for a long time, to 10 plus years now. But a lot of teams, unfortunately, did not come away with any stage wins. You had, even Astana had a couple wins, UAE had a couple wins, and then, of course, Quick-Step and Sky, they had a lot of success. Cool for Christophe, and a little redemption. And even Demar got his, so the French sprinter got their stage win, and now Christophe gets his. So cool all around there. GC, the overall GC, how it played out. Oh, and here's the thing for Christophe, I should mention. Here's why I'm happy for him as well. Just like it was cool for Degenkolb, since he was almost out of cycling from his injuries. So last year going into Switzerland, Bern, I believe it was, There were shadows from the trees right near the finish or all along the last few hundred meters. Christoph had a great lead out. Christoph was riding on the front. He gave a little kick thinking he was going over the finish line, but the finish line was actually another 6 feet down the road. And because of that, he kicked too soon and he thrust forward his front wheel. And so because of it, the people behind him came by and actually won the stage. And he was really pissed off and disappointed that the shadow screwed with his timing. Anyway, so cool redemption for Christoph. I'm happy. And he got to win on the Champs-Elysees. So that's a nice capper to the tour and for his career. Overall GC, you got Geraint Thomas, of course, in yellow. Tom Dumoulin, 151 down. You got Chris Froome, 224 down. So only 33 seconds between them. Roglic, 322. He faded in that time trial. Lost over a minute or so to Chris Froome. You got Kruijswijk, Roglic's teammate, at 608. So there's what I'm talking about. From 4th to 5th, it jumps almost 3 minutes. And then Bardet is at 657. So that's a pretty close gap. Then you have Mikel Landa at 737 down. Dan Martin at 905 down. Zakarin at 1237 down. And then Quintana at 1418 down. So Quintana, so a huge drop though from Roglic to Quintana. 11 minutes just from 4th to 10th. Like I said, Landa actually was putting out the same wattage, and yet he dropped in the GC from what he had last year. And then look at the 33 seconds between Dumoulin and Froome. And that's about fair, because if you think about it, Dumoulin would get dropped on the attacks on the hills, but then he would claw his way back. And it was only when Geraint Thomas would do a big kick to then finally sprint off to the finish or consolidate his lead, he would be a little bit stronger than Dumoulin, but then in turn, Dumoulin was always a little bit stronger than Froome. A few times in the Alps, when Dumoulin led out, Froome would ride up to him and catch Dumoulin's wheel. But then by the time they got to the Pyrenees, when Dumoulin would attack or lead out, he did get 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds on Chris Froome. And then it was Bernal who was saving Froome's ass and helping to pace him back. So I think that's pretty fair overall, that really Dumoulin, if you add up those 10, 15, 20-second gaps where Froome cracked and fell back, that would be about 25 to 35 or 40 seconds. In turn, apparently, they looked at Geraint Thomas versus Tom Dumoulin. And really, there was only 1, 2, 3 seconds difference between them on the road, unless you take into account where Dumoulin, as well as with Froome, they crashed in that first week. And Froome lost like 50, 51 seconds. Dumoulin lost something like 57, 58 seconds or a minute. So right there, Geraint Thomas got about a 1 minute buffer on Froome and Dumoulin just from the crash. Then there, Dumoulin had the mechanical on the Mur de Bretagne, and he had to play catch up, so he lost time there. And then he got a time penalty thrown at him, Dumoulin, because they said he was pacing too long behind the team cars. So in other words, if you add up the time lost from the crash, the time lost from the mechanical, and then the time penalty, that then put him, the minute 50 or so down to Geraint Thomas. And then the X factor is Geraint Thomas also got those time bonuses by winning those 2 stages, as well as coming in second on that downhill to Roglic, where Roglic got the time bonus, but then so did Geraint Thomas. So really, it's kind of interesting that some might argue that really Geraint Thomas only beat Tom Dumoulin by like 1 or 2 seconds because of those penalties and the crashes. But remember, and again, I think this is where it's fair, if you really watch the race, although Tom Dumoulin was very strong and steady, it was always Geraint Thomas that looked stronger and fresher. And it was actually Geraint Thomas attacking in the Alps, for instance, on like La Rosière, where he rode away from everybody. So let's say Tom Dumoulin had been within 8 or 9 seconds. You could see where Geraint Thomas would have attacked sooner, dropped Dumoulin sooner, and got himself 10, 15, 20 seconds like that. Even though Dumoulin was great, really Geraint Thomas was the strongest. And he was the strongest to Chris Froome too. Here's the other thing. Froome is very fortunate that he's on the same team as Geraint Thomas, because when Froome was being dropped and when Froome was showing weakness to Roglic and Dumoulin and even to Bardet at times, Thomas could have attacked Froome and really put 30 seconds or even a minute or two into Froome. So really, Froome is fortunate to be in third. He does deserve it, but he's lucky and fortunate that one, he had Bernal there to help save his ass and pace him back, and that he had Geraint Thomas with no big impetus to want to attack his own teammate. They looked at the overall speed over the whole Tour de France between Thomas and Dumoulin, and it was the difference between 0.18 and 0.17. In other words, something like their average speed was, Geraint Thomas's was 40.18 kilometers per hour, and Dumoulin's was 40.17 kilometers per hour. And the commentator did a rough calculation, and they said that that equated out to basically they were within the same kilometer the whole race. That would be, where they're within the same kilometer. So either you have Thomas right at the finish and Dumoulin at the back of that kilometer. So let's say Dumoulin 900 meters back, but let's just kind of peg it where Dumoulin is 400, 500, 600 meters behind Geraint Thomas, and there you go. There's your 2-minute difference. So again, it evens out. Kind of a weird aspect, but this popped into my mind. You had the Welsh Dragon winning the Tour de France. So a little bit weird. I don't know, the symbolism there of the dragon. Ik dienst, I serve. Who do you serve? Well, first of all, it's kind of interesting that the tour started in that Vendée region. And the Vendée region is where a lot of the Phoenician Carthaginians settled. And they were big on maritime, just like they were in the Mediterranean. And then from there, they helped to settle and did the tin trade with Wales, but it wasn't Wales then. Let's just call it southwestern Britain or the British Isles. And then you have the whole aspect of these are Celts, and then you have the Bretons, and then the Welsh. I don't know. It's sort of, was this the Phoenicians beating the Romans, or was this Rome versus the maritime? And the Romans, by the way, went in and conquered that area around the Vendée and crushed those tribes. But in the meantime, prior to that, for a few centuries, around 500, 400, 300 BC, you had a strong trade alliance between that Norman, Breton, Vendée region of France and then the area that is now Wales and southwestern Britain. So anyway, kind of trippy. It would be curious to dig in a little bit and look at the lineage of those who finish on the podium and see, are they Roman lineage? Are they French? Are they Gaelic, or are they Gauls? Are they Gallo-Roman? Are they Phoenician, Carthaginian descent? And the thing is not so much Germanic descent, though. They don't seem too big on that. It's been a while since a German has been in the top 3. So sometimes the Germans get in there, but a little bit of the, maybe some ancient pissing matches going on between the Roman, Gaelic, Gallic, Breton, Welsh, Celtic lineage, and then where that ties into the old Carthaginian and then the Germanic side. So anyway, but that might be an interesting thought exercise to look at. You pretty much have to go hardcore the whole tour. And what I mean by that is sometimes there's the rope-a-dope idea where you go at 80 or 90% and you let your rival go at 90, 95, 100%, and then you let them burn themselves out and then you come back strong. I don't really think that works so well in something like cycling or the Tour de France, because take it like this. One, you can be thinking you're doing a rope-a-dope where you're only expending 85, 90, 95%. And then you assume your rivals are putting out 90, 95, 100%. So you kind of assume, oh, well, I'll be fresher in the third week of the tour. Not necessarily, because when you're putting out 90% and thinking that you're doing fine, that you're only losing 10 or 20 seconds to a rival and you'll gain all that back later, Maybe not. Maybe they're actually only putting out 90, 91, 92%. And now that they have a 20 or 30-second gap on you, they don't have to work any harder and they can just mark and react to your attacks later in the tour. So it only would work if you can do like what Quintana did and you can jump way ahead and win a stage and gain back a minute or so. The problem is you also may do like what Quintana did and you might fade. Or you might do what Roglic did and be very bold and attack and then pay the price a day or two or three later and then lose all that time back. And then even look at like a Dan Martin. Dan Martin lost all that time. And so from that point in about the first and going into the second week of the tour, Dan Martin tried multiple attacks. And he tried attacking 20, 30, 40 kilometers from the finish, thinking that the GC contenders would not worry so much because he was 6, 7, 8 minutes down. And then he was hoping that by riding so hard, he could maybe gain a minute or two or three back. No, he never could get more than about a minute ahead of the GC peloton, the yellow core, and then most of the time they would chase him down and bring him right back into the peloton before they got to the finish. So really, the key is you could kind of say, don't bullshit around. Don't play games thinking I'm going to save energy and just lose 10 or 15 or 20 seconds, but I'll make it back by being super strong in the last 5, 6 days of the tour. And I'll gain all those 30, 40 seconds back, plus gain another 1 or 2 minutes on my rivals and go from 5th or 6th place in the tour up to 1st or 2nd, because you're playing with fire and you don't know if you're going to crash or have a mechanical. So really, if you kind of break it down, it's you better get time early in the tour. You better do like Geraint Thomas did and already get 40, 50 seconds or a minute, because people like Chris Froome and Dumoulin crash or have a mechanical. Then you in turn better hope that you have really good luck where you don't have a mechanical or have a crash, and then have it happen at the wrong time, like when the peloton decides to go balls out, or there's a breakaway, or it's near the finish when the peloton's just going balls out anyway, regardless, because they want to win that stage. And then after that, it's just pure endurance. It's just who's the strongest. And you could even see that with Landa and Bardet and Zakarin and Micah jumping out 100 kilometers to go in stage 19, and they got up to 3-4 minutes ahead. But then because rivals like Lotto Jumbo started doing work to chase them down, and you had Robert Gesink killing himself, even while Amador was killing himself for Landa, that gap got reduced little by little by little until it was down to 1:30 and then down to a minute. And then you could clearly tell that Bardet, Landa, and Zakarin and Micah were fading, because then they all got caught. It all came together, and then they all descended to the finish, minus Zakarin and Kruijswijk that fell off the back, and then Roglic, of course, who was super aggressive and got a gain and won that stage. The whole thing is, you just sit back once you get the time gains like Geraint Thomas did, and you just sort of hope or know that from your training and everything, you are strong and strong enough. And then after that, you just let the rivals hurt each other and let the rivals do the work for you. Just like Lotto Jumbo did when Robert Gesink killed himself to close the gap to the Landa group out in front of them. And then in the same way, you had Bob Jungels and Alaphilippe still in the remnant of that breakaway on stage 19, where they were 30 seconds and a minute ahead of Landa and Bardet and Micah and Zakarin. So now you have Alaphilippe and Jungels are working to stay ahead. And so then that's making Micah and Bardet and Landa work harder to catch them. And then in the meantime, the yellow jersey, Geraint Thomas, can just sit there and know exactly how much work he has to do to close on them while they burn themselves out. This is the kind of screwy thing. And it's kind of crazy why these guys do this as a career. Okay, so think about baseball, Major League Baseball. If you are successful 30% of the time, that's considered good. So you are failing 70% of the time, and yet you are still considered a freaking great baseball player overall. And you could have a long career in baseball and make millions and millions of dollars. Okay, now let's look at the Tour de France. Okay, you got 176 riders to begin with. So there's attrition. It was down to 146, but still, at the beginning, it's based on the percentage or whatever, the whole of 175, 176 riders. Okay, who really won, right? So let's look at it. You had Geraint Thomas won 2 stages, Alaphilippe won 2 stages, Gaviria won 2 stages, Groenewegen won 2 stages, and Sagan won, I want to say, 3 stages. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 riders who basically won 50% of the stages. So that means all the rest of the riders, the other 170 riders, are fighting to try to win basically 50% of the remaining stages. 10% of that beginning 176 riders, you're talking 16, 17, 18 riders. There's only so many stages up for grabs for only so many riders. And if you think about it, then that's like 90, 95% of the peloton. They're just there. I mean, they're hoping and praying that they can get 1, 2, 3 stage wins in the Tour de France over a 7 to 10 year career. Like Jens Voigt. How many stages did Jens Voigt win in the Tour de France? 2 or 3? And he rode for, I think, 16 years. I mean, think about how rare it is then to even do like a Greg Van Avermaet, where the timing put him in yellow, and then he was able to defend and keep yellow for about a quarter to a third of the tour or so. So really, what is that? You have like a 2 to 3 to 4% chance of success, and you have like a 95, 97, 98% chance of failure. And otherwise, you're just there to support the team leader and then just survive the freaking Tour de France. And then you have a Sagan. He survived. So he did all that work to get in the green jersey, but at the end, he was just trying to survive the tour. So think of the weird juxtaposition that here on stage 19, you had Landa, Bardet, Micah, Zakarin, Dumoulin, Froome, Roglic, and Kruijswijk, even Quintana, and then Froome and Thomas. They're all in there fighting on the front of the race, trying to secure their GC or move up. And then here you have Peter Sagan on the back, just hoping to survive the tour and not have to abandon. 2 completely different goals, 2 different sides of the race. And the pay is kind of jacked up. So I was kind of doing a little bit of look into this. So there's like 17, 18 top teams. That's like a Team Sky. And they have around, each team has around 23 to 25 to 28 riders. So if you take the 18 top teams, that's about 450 riders total. Then there's like 8 continental teams that are considered like a top tier continental team. These are the ones that sometimes the Tour de France wonders, should we invite them in because they don't really win the Tour de France or they don't really finish in the top 3 or 4 in GC. Yes, that's true, but they also add a lot of dynamic action because they're the ones that do get out in the breakaways, and they're the ones that do take a lot of risk to try to win, where if they were eliminated, a lot of the other teams would just sit back in the peloton, take no risks, just to try to consolidate their little short-term goal for each stage, and it would be very boring. Or I should say it would be less interesting. If Team Sky has a budget of like 30 million, then these top continental teams, their budget is only about a quarter of that. So their budget is like 6, 7, 8 million. And then, okay, so if you add those, that's another 8 teams with about 25 riders. That's another 200. So let's say there's about 650 to 700 world-class or world-class continental riders. And then of which 175 ride in the Tour de France, and another about, let's say only a few will go and ride in the Volta. So let's say another 130 or so are going to ride in the Volta that didn't ride in the Tour de France, with like 40 or so trying to ride both races back to back. Okay, now here's the sucky thing. let's say those two tier, the 18 top teams and then another 8 top continental teams. If you're a team leader, yeah, you can make $2 or $3 or $4 million a year. Or if you're a super domestique that is critical to a team like Sky, and you can win stages in smaller tours, or you can come in first or second in something like Bastogne Liège or whatever, then you can demand, or you can ask and get, let's say, 700,000 to $1.5 million, and then it kind of filters down from there, where maybe somebody like Egan Bernal is only getting 150, 200,000, but he for sure can demand and will get more than that. Okay, that means the top continental teams are starting at like 50% or less of those numbers. So maybe the top rider on those smaller teams, they're getting more like 500,000 to a million, or more like 100 to 200,000. Okay, that means then you have hundreds of riders that just ride in the United States, or just ride in France, or just ride in Britain, where they're lucky to get paid 30 to 70,000 US dollars a year. And some of them, they just get expenses. So they get the uniform, they get a bike, and then they get travel expenses. They get a couple nights in a hotel room, they get a massage or two, and then they get food for a couple days, and that's it. And then any prize money. And by the way, it's very similar to professional tennis, where, yeah, your top tier tennis players are making a few million to millions and millions a year with sponsorship. Then you have the next tier down that are doing your Berlin tournaments, or your Coral Gables, Florida type tournaments. Those guys and gals are, let's say, making more like 80,000 to 200,000 or 300,000. But then there's dozens and dozens and dozens of actual professional tennis players that maybe are lucky if they're a tennis pro making 70, 80,000 a year, and they get more with tips, or they have to have a side job. It's really trippy how the gradient really drops off after you get out of these top 2, 3, 400 riders in the world. It's a super high level of performance with small margins of victory. And if you kind of look at the Tour de France standings, and you look at the guys in like 25th through 40th place, these are the guys that get in the breakaways. They're the ones that are able to sit and pace in the peloton and ride 25 to 30 plus miles an hour for 60, 80, 100 kilometers. They're the ones that can hang in the mountains and don't really fall out until the final climb. And they're the ones that sometimes are even in the GC group until the bitter end, but then they pay for it the next day. Like you had Izagirre and Pozzovivo hanging in there with Geraint Thomas on stage 19 until the very end, when they cracked and then didn't go over the descent. But still, on that given day, they were riding with the guy who won the 2018 Tour de France. And yet these are the guys who can go out and win a classic or come in first, second, third kind of thing. And yet they're 25, 45 minutes or even an hour plus down on Geraint Thomas. High performance, tons of work, actually super strong riders, and yet when it comes to the Tour de France, they're an hour down and in like 45th place. Honorable mentions for this year's Tour. Let's give some honorable mentions. This is for the guys who were in multiple breakaways. These are for the guys who did the long range attack. These are for the guys who supported their team leader and burned themselves out. These are for the guys who were there almost winning multiple stages only to be caught and then to end up coming in, 10th place, 20th place, and a minute, 2, 3, 4 minutes down. Okay, let's throw shout outs too. Mollema gave it a shot. Age and conditioning caught up to him. Common John, French guy, bold, maybe got into too many breakaways, faded in the third week. Marc Solar for Movistar, tons of pacing, helped Valverde, Quintana, and Landa a lot. Very strong rider, even did decently in the final individual time trial. The Izagirre brothers, out there in the breakaway, out there with the GC until the last climbs. Pierre Rolland gave it a shot, got into breakaways, faded a bit though. Valverde, age catching up a bit, still a bold rider, still likes to put in attacks, still very solid. Geschke, Gesink, Frele, Frele winning a stage, Frele knowing when to time out of the breakaway. Harada, tons of work. Bosenhagen, hey, they're in the final 10, 15, 20 riders, but just not quite strong enough to beat the pure sprinters. But you get Bosenhagen jumping out in front of the peloton or in a breakaway that's surviving to the last couple kilometers, and that guy has the power. He's dangerous. He can win a stage, and meanwhile, put Bosenhagen on a flat stage with like 30-mile-an-hour wind, and that dude will just drive through it. Okay, big time honorable mentions. Nieve almost won, got caught in La Rosière. Stuyven up to Mende. Stuyven jumped out, was going balls out, gave it a shot, got caught. Kangert in the breakaway the whole day, went solo, only to be caught on the last climb. Adam Yates, take away the crash, take away the dehydration. Adam Yates potentially in the top 10. Dan Martin, multiple attacks, won a stage. Ralpha Micah, kind of a down GC, but was there in the end and put in a great 100-kilometer attack from the finish. And Kruijswijk almost won a stage, going up Alpe d'Huez, leading out in front of the breakaway. And then he gets caught. He just faded there at the end. So, awesome job to these guys. Looking forward, what's going to happen with Movistar? Who's the leader of that team? And what's going on with Quintana? Is Quintana done in the sense? I mean, maybe he just needs to focus on your Tour of Switzerland and those shorter kind of races, or focus on something like the Criterium du Dauphiné, a 6, 7, 8 day race. Valverde aging. What's going on with Landa though? Maybe Landa just needs a team to focus around him, because if he put out the wattage that he put out, and if he was out there in front of Geraint Thomas and those guys, he not strong enough to beat Geraint Thomas, not strong enough to even beat a Tom Dumoulin, but maybe third, fourth. I don't know. Maybe he could even finish first, second, third if the timing is right. Katusha, you got the team director talking shit about Marcel Kittel to the press. Not cool. And then that reminds me of what went down with Contador the last couple of years. I don't remember all the details, but I want to say it was this rich, like Russian oligarch who basically paid for the team by himself. The guy had a private RV with a shower and everything, where he would follow the Tour de France, and then when he wanted to, he would just say, pull over, I'm going to have lunch on the side of the road, and then I'm going to take a shower. I mean, the guy had a total setup, but then he was like a Jerry Jones or Al Davis in American NFL football, where he liked to meddle. And he didn't like Contador's style. He didn't like that Contador had his own way of riding the Tour de France, and he talked shit and criticized Alberto Contador to the media. And what's up with the cohesion? Is Katusha, is it about Marcel Kittel and sprinting, or is it about somebody like Zakarin? And Zakarin better get better at his descending, or he could lose his second or third place finish just from his time trialing and then his descending. Bardet, off year, or are you going to bounce back? And meanwhile, Bardet, remember those young names, those younger people that are 21 to 25, they're coming up behind you. So your window might close here in the next 2 or 3 years. Richie Porte, is this finally it with the crashing out of the Tour de France? Or are you done? I mean, and it sucks because we have yet to see if Richie Porte could have beaten Geraint Thomas or Tom Dumoulin or Chris Froome. And that goes for Vincenzo Nibali. I think Nibali in this year's Tour maybe would have been more like third, fourth, fifth, but that still would have added a lot more interest and options into this year's race. So too bad it's missing and missed Richie Porte and Nibali. And then like Lotto Jumbo, good job. They're a sprint team with Groenewegen, and then they had Kruijswijk and Roglic in the top five. And then just overall, you got teams maybe like Cofidis, but Cofidis is more like tries to go for the sprint stage at the end. But say Mitchelton Scott, they were mentioned. Should they be about the GC and somebody like Adam Yates, or should they focus on also having a sprinter? Because it seems like it's dividing them too much to try to split their internal energy to try to be there with at least one or two lead outs for their sprinter, and then also to have the other 4, 5, 6 be there to support somebody like an Adam Yates. Maybe they just need to focus on the GC. Kind of bittersweet. It's like a movie ending or a good book. You want it to keep going, but yet you want to know what happens and have closure. So we got the closure, but still kind of a bummer. Got to go another basically 11 months and 29 days or whatever to do this again. Kind of trippy that it goes from riding in the countryside and where the finish is in maybe these cities of just 200,000 or 300,000, and now they end up in this metropolis that is Paris, one of the great cities of the world, one of the high achievements for humanity, but yet a little bit strange since it's also one of the focal points of like your hardcore sun worship, and yet it's kind of indicative that we're in this dummy load era where your true hardcore symbolism for your sun worship and your goddess worship are all buildings that are from the 1800s back to the 15, 16, 1700s, where your quote newer buildings since the 1900s and then since the 1980s are much more modern looking and less obvious as your hardcore kind of occultic sun worship iconography. That being said, what was it, late 80s when they stuck the old pyramid right there in front of the Louvre? And kind of a little side note, little bit interesting or trippy, you got the tricolor of the French flag. You got the tricolor of the French flag, red, white, and blue. And then you have the United States, red, white, and blue. And they're very hardcore goddess worshiping type nations. We got the goddess Freedom sitting right there on top of the Capitol Dome in DC. We have the goddess sitting right there in New York Harbor. And then you flip over to France, and there's Athena and the various goddesses and the Arc de Triomphe and all over that city. Anyway, kind of trippy. And it's no wonder that there is a very strong partnership between the United States and France that is kind of an undercurrent, because I think no one really focuses on that, and yet it's there and it is super hardcore. And good old Ben Franklin and all that coming over to France and hanging out. He was quite the talk of the town, but he was chilling and hanging with the English too. What was it? The Hellfire Club or whatever. They were having good old times. So good times indeed. So great tour, and have yourselves a wonderful week and day. Thank you.